Right. So how much trouble can you actually get for riding a horse into Bristol? Hello, welcome to this episode of Quake It Up. In this episode, we're going to be doing a deep dive into an event which I've mentioned quite a lot and is infamous in Quake history, and that is James Nayler's ride into Bristol. We're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of what he was thinking, why he did this, where he went, and what happened to him in a kind of detail which I just haven't gone into before. So just a quick reminder of who we're talking about. So James Nayler is one of the founding members of Quakerism. He's one of the Valiant 60, one of really at the heart of Quakerism, and kind of above that, really, he is in kind of a very small group of Quakers who were really important for the initial spread of Quakerism, especially in London, where he was very successful. He had a wide following, a very ardent and very enthused following, shall we say. Give you a bit of context then, we're in the year 1656. It's October, which is something actually I had never really realised before. I thought this happened on Palm Sunday itself, but apparently it wasn't on Palm Sunday. He didn't go all out too. The events were similar to Palm Sunday, but it's not Palm Sunday. It is the 24th of October, which is a Tuesday, and it is apparently very, very wet and rainy. So we'll talk through maybe what he did first, and then maybe we'll talk about why he did it and the effects that this had and what was going on, because I think this is an event which is so well known, but I think we might just need to really go into maybe his mindset a little bit. So in the city of Bristol, which is important because this is a city which has seen quite a lot of which has seen a real growth in the numbers of Quakers in the recent years, and they'd been certainly getting the authorities all riled up, and so it's not as if the authorities didn't know of Quakers and were sort of flummoxed and taken aback by them. They knew that Quakers were about. They were distrustful of Quakers because of their going naked as a sign and things like that, and obviously some of the theological points as well. So we already had a sort of police force, if you will, that is negatively predisposed towards Quakers anyway. It was quite Puritan as a city, and also it was quite well to do. It had a very strong mercantile class as well. So I suppose maybe the egalitarian in him and the provoker in him saw Bristol as a prime opportunity to cause maybe the maximum exposure, and also guaranteed negative reaction. Like there is no way that I can imagine that he could have thought that, oh yeah, be fine. There's nothing. What could possibly go wrong? He would know that it would go wrong, and so I think, well, if you're gonna do something which is gonna get you arrested, then you might as well just go out and go all out, and he does. So we have on this a fateful day James Nayler, obviously, but he is not alone. He is surrounded by some of his most ardent and most diligent supporters, namely Martha Symonds, Hannah Stranger, and Dorcas Urbery. Now, Dorcas Urbery, you might remember from my Halloween video last year, because this is the very woman who claimed in her trial, following on from this, that James Nayler raised her from the dead. So she's there, alive. So that's pretty wild. There's also the two husbands of the aforementioned Stranger and Symonds. So there's a good group of them. Now, this has been very particularly organised, and it's said that it's Martha Symonds who is the key organiser in this. I suppose this might be another reason why the authorities in Bristol found this so shocking as well, was that this was a staged event, so to speak, where women were playing a very active role. So also edgy in a completely other way as well. So I've tried to work out the route they took. So what we have James Nayler on a horse, not a donkey, and we have the followers. Some of them who we've named, we know they are laying out garments in front of the horse as James Nayler is riding into Bristol, and they are singing "Holy, Holy, Holy." And apparently Hannah Stranger called him "Thou fairest of 10,000. Now, I'm not sure if that's a Bible quote or just a very, pro-Nayler phrase. So they're saying very provocative things during this as well. In terms of the route that they went, it seems to be that they would have gone through either Temple Gate or Redcliffe Gate into Bristol. So that would have been how they probably would have got in. And either that they would either gone through Temple Street or Redcliffe Street, depending on which gate they took. Both of these ways are major thoroughfares. So they would have been obviously the major routes into Bristol. So they would have been lined with shops and houses. It's raining though, so probably that might have meant that there weren't so many people out. But obviously there's shops and, people can look out through their windows and see this strange procession of Quakers going through Bristol. And it's likely that their destination was probably one of the markets. This is where Quakers often went to preach, so it's probably likely that this is where James Nayler would want to go to use his celebrated eloquence and rhetoric in order to talk about Quakerism. However, they probably wouldn't have. They may have got there, but they were certainly arrested before he could do any sort of preaching, and he was put to Newgate Prison, and then would later moved on to London. We'll get there in a moment. So we've got effectively a symbolic representation of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, with these garments being used as palms. We've got James Nayler on the horse representing the donkey. Could they not find a donkey? Is that hard to find? If you're doing it, would you not just go all out and get a donkey? Anyway, why? So what he is trying to do, we've got to remember that Quakers at this time, and it's not just him, Quakers at this time are big on this idea of performance theology. Because Quakerism is such an inward thing, what they're trying to do is they're trying to show outwardly what they're experiencing inwardly. You had people, as I mentioned earlier, people going off naked to try and show or to symbolically show that the new life that they think that has been revealed to them as inwardly. But then there's a certain element of shock that he is trying to engage with. He is trying to get people to think. I suppose in that it's probably similar to protest groups today throwing soup over paintings or over Stonehenge or whatever. It's probably that level of sort of shock, I suppose, to try and get people to really take the Quakers seriously and to really maybe try and understand what their message is. He's not actually thinking he's Jesus. Do his supporters think he's Jesus? That's another matter. He does not think he's Jesus. He thinks, and how he defends himself later is that he says that Christ is in him. And so again, it's this outward projection of what he feels inwardly. On the side, I'd never really considered this. I was just so wowed by what he did and the effect that it had on Quakerism more generally and stuff. But this wasn't even on Palm Sunday. He just decided to do this. But I think the reason why he did this is because he was seeing the entrance of Jesus into Jerusalem as a spiritual and inward event, that it wasn't just about historical Jesus entering historical Jerusalem, that this was about the spiritual Jesus entering the spiritual Jerusalem within everyone. And this is what he was trying to manifest. And this is a Quaker message. And I hadn't really understood that. And I think actually that's really brilliant. But anyway, I'm sure he probably knew that he wouldn't be able to get away with this. So I suppose there's a certain sense of martyrdom in him as well. And I think maybe he got a bit too big for his boots as well. I think he surrounded himself with people who just thought he was the best, maybe even the Messiah. You had people calling him Lord and Prince of Peace and things like this. His groups, his group of followers were very, very keen on him. So that must have had a sort of self-aggrandizing feeling as well. You also had the tension that he had with George Fox and, wanting to maybe outdo him. There have been some people who've talked about maybe his emotional state as well. We forget. We say, oh, and then he went to prison and then he was out again. And then he went to prison and then he was out again. Prison was awful. Prison was beyond awful. And if you're constantly going to prison in the 17th century, where I have very little access to any basic things to live, and you're without that for continued periods of time, and you're raising people from the dead, whilst you're doing it. I mean, that's going to be exhausting. And then you're going out and you're an itinerant preacher. You're going around and you're never stopping. And then you have all these fans calling you Lord and Prince of Peace. And you must just be all over the place. There have been some that blame Martha Simmons as a bad influence on him, which I think is probably certainly true. She seems to be very interesting. She organized all this. And, you could argue that, had she not done that, would he have done something similar? I think it's still possible, but I think that does play a part in this as well. The problem that we have is that there doesn't seem to be another similar event that I can really find of someone, to the extent that it looks like that you're impersonating Jesus. That really just wasn't something that was done. And so this is why it was just so shocking, because there's nothing to compare it with. Now, let's say you didn't have really quite radical groups out there. You've got the ranters and the diggers and the levelers who are all doing quite radical things and very socially unacceptable things. But I think one that is so biblically charged, I don't think there is a comparison really. So I think this is why it's treated in the way that it's treated. They originally put into prison again in Bristol, but they basically Parliament decided this needs to be dealt with in London. So they were then taken to London for trial. Now, this trial was very, very, very public. The reason was clear. From Parliament's position, obviously, they wanted to make sure that this was dealt with severely so that it wouldn't happen again. And because we've got to remember that England at this time was incredibly religiously fragile because of all of these groups, Quakers being just one of many. And they didn't want everyone parading around being Jesus and taking it one step further. So they really wanted to shut it down effectively. So his trial began on the 16th of December, so nearly 2 months, I suppose, since the act itself, and it lasted 10 days. The charge was blasphemy, and I don't know why it took 10 days. I suppose they went through all of their ins and outs, and I believe his followers were questioned as well, though I think their punishments were obviously less, which strikes me as strange, just because obviously, yes, he was the one pretending to be Jesus, and I get that, but surely the one who organized it and the ones sort of egging him on, I suppose, should have received some punishment, but seemingly they didn't. I mean, I don't know. I haven't been able to find that out too much. You obviously don't help your case when your followers maybe think you're Jesus. So he is tried for execution and narrowly avoids execution by 14 votes. So 96 say no execution and 82 say execution. So it could have been worse. I mean, one could argue that it wasn't exactly great what he received, and I thoroughly believe that did kill him in the long run, but it wasn't a straightforward execution, which I'm assuming, execution for blasphemy. I don't know what that would have been in 17th century England, but that it wouldn't have been a simple head chopping off scenario, I'm sure. In terms of the punishments, then, they're pretty awful. So he's put in the pillory for 2 hours. He was whipped over 300 times. 300, and that is, his tongue was bored with a red hot iron, so through the tongue. He was branded with a letter B on his head. There's quite I'll see if I can put it there. There's quite a famous portrayal of him with that brand on. He was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor in prison. He was denied pen, ink, and paper. So he's completely isolated, kind of like being without your phone nowadays. He also, interestingly, had to ride backwards, trying to imagine this, I'm guessing just facing the wrong way, through Bristol, where again he was whipped. So more whipping. I mean, apart from having bits chopped off or limbs chopped off or whatever, I mean, it can't really... I think that's probably the worst it could possibly be. I mean, absolutely awful stuff. What's interesting as well in this is whether Parliament actually had the right to try and to prosecute Nayler. Obviously, Parliament was effectively was controlling England at this time, but the methods and the means for doing this weren't necessarily actually there. There wasn't actually a law that James Nayler had actually broken. The closest thing apparently that there was the 1648 blasphemy ordinance, and this was basically used to prosecute people who denied the Trinity, Christ's divinity, or the Bible's authority. So Quakers probably could be done for that last one, but not in this instance. None of these things have been broken by James Nayler. So I suppose in a similar way to how Parliament dealt with the trial of the King, Charles I, they didn't have any actual legal authority to do this, but they were motivated by political reasons why it was considered a good thing to do. I can understand the Quaker reaction, really. Like, they wanted to distance themselves from this. He was going down. And the thing is, James Nayler knew he was going down. So I suppose he could expect nothing else. I found this quote from George Fox, where this was sort of him sort of washing his hands of James Nayler, where he says, "He ran out into imaginations and a company with him, and they raised up a great darkness in the nation." This was the Quaker stance, really, that this was bad. And as I said, everyone knows it's bad. James Nayler himself knew that this was bad. This was not a good thing to do in 17th century England. I think the downside, which maybe he didn't see, was that it was taken up by the enemies of Quakerism, people that were looking to drag Quakerism into the mud, and used him as an example that actually Quakers, ranters, all of these, religious extremists, they're all the same, and so they should be prosecuted as such. Whereas George Fox would turn around and say, "No, we're very different, and this is how." And this then began the process where we get to a less radical, I suppose, type of Quakerism as a direct result of this, because it was so public. So James Nayler, he doesn't, as I said, survive long after once he's released from his hard labour. And I just kind of want to finish off with his last words. So this is 19.12 in Quaker Faith and Practice, and discusses what happened to him. So, he was going on his way home, and he was robbed. Like, had he not suffered enough, and was found in a field, and he died, and he died there in 1660. These are his last words, which are quite well known. But I think I wanted to share. "There is a spirit which I feel that delights to do no evil, nor to revenge any wrong, but delights to endure all things, in hope to enjoy its own in the end. Its crown is meekness, its life is everlasting love unfeigned. It takes its kingdom with entreaty, and not with contention, and keeps it by lowliness of mind. I found it alone, being forsaken. I have fellowship therein with them who lived in dens and desolate places in the earth, who through death obtained this resurrection and eternal holy life." And so that is an in-depth discussion of James Nayler's ride into Bristol. I've mentioned it so much just as the fateful ride into Bristol, or Nayler's ride into Bristol, or so on, but it's, I think, such a powerful story. I do also want to say, if you want to maybe look at another aspect, I'll put some of the articles and websites that I used in order to find some of this in the show notes. I would also recommend checking out Thee Quaker Podcasts. They've got a brilliant episode on this, so please do have a look at that as well for more James Nayler antics. And I'll see you next time. Thank you very much for watching the video. If you liked it, please do click on the thumbs up and the subscribe button to get more videos about Quakerism in the UK today. It really does help, and thanks once again.